Before we begin, thank you for being here. If family stories matter to you, the kind that leave a quiet echo long after the video ends, consider subscribing. It helps this channel bring more true, human tales to light, and it means you won't miss the next chapter when the heart learns what the head has long resisted. You're watching a space for real stories told with care. Today's title: This mother was told not to attend her son's wedding. The night before my son's wedding, a voice found me in the threshold between laughter and ceremony, between the warm light of the rehearsal dinner and the parking lot where the air had started to cool. "After tomorrow," Jessica whispered, her breath even, her perfume expensive and steady, "you're not part of this family anymore." The words were soft the way a scalpel is soft, metal quiet until it meets skin. I had come with a simple gift, a scrapbook bound in pale linen. On the cover, I had stitched Daniel's initials with thread the color of sky just before evening lets go. A mother collects time in small ways. A first pair of shoes, the glow stick from a little league game, the page where a child's handwriting turns from lopsided bravery into confident script. You think you're saving their childhood. In truth, you're saving your proof that the years meant something, that love multiplied even when money didn't. Jessica didn't take the book. She didn't even glance at the ribbon I'd knotted by hand. She let her eyes move over me the way one studies a replacement part they never ordered. Perfect hair, perfect dress, perfect smile shaped like a secret that belonged to a different room. "You're extra baggage," she said, her lips not quite moving. "Don't embarrass yourself by clinging. I am not a dramatic woman, though life has a way of making you rehearse for scenes you never chose. When my husband left, the script had no stage directions. You learn as you go, how to measure a paycheck down to the last penny, how to carry a sleeping boy from the car without waking him, how to speak in a voice that keeps fear from touching a child's name. I managed. We do, we mothers. We improvise our way to mourning. But there, in that doorway, I could not improvise grace. My throat caught on old dust, the kind that rises when you open boxes stored behind heavier boxes. I held the book tighter, not because I thought it would change her mind, but because it kept my hands from trembling the way the heart does when it's been told it is now a guest in the home it built. Jessica looked satisfied with the silence she'd purchased. She patted my arm like she was tipping a server. "Go home, Mrs. Miller. Sleep in." The hallway swallowed her heels. Someone inside laughed at a joke that would not last till dawn. There are moments that feel like the ground has taken a vote and decided you won't be invited to stand. I drove home without remembering the drive. That is the mercy of muscle memory. The body knows the turns when the mind is busy falling. At the kitchen table, the house performed its little nighttime chamber music. The refrigerator hummed in the key of reliable. The clock on the wall ticked like someone trying to keep me company. I set the scrapbook down and opened to a page with a photo no one else had ever seen, because I had not told anyone I had kept it. Daniel at 7, holding a paper dinosaur he cut out with scissors at school, smiling that gap-toothed grin invented for either joy or courage. Sometimes it is hard to tell the difference. People like to say weddings are beginnings. They are, of course. But for the ones who raise the groom, a wedding is also a ledger. You add up years of lunches packed, apologies offered, reports signed, rooms painted, lies told to keep the dark from stretching too far. No monsters here, only shadows we haven't learned the names for. You tell yourself that if the numbers come out right, someone will say you did well. Not as a compliment, as a benediction. I sat with the arithmetic and found that grief does not ask for permission. It takes a chair near you and waits you out. When the tears came, they weren't loud. They came like a polite rain in a dry summer, refusing the thunder. Even then, inside the ache, something more practical stirred. Anger is a citizen of the mind. It votes quickly and volunteers for every job. Mine did not scream. It took out a piece of paper and wrote a sentence I could live with. If they do not want me tomorrow, I will not go. You might think that is petty. Maybe it is, but I had learned a few simple rules. You don't sit at tables where you are the bill of fare, and you don't applaud when the magician saws through your chair. I folded the page and tucked it under the scrapbook the way some people tuck prayers into the cracks of old stone. Sleep was a rumor that night. I tried, I did. I pictured walking into the church in the dress Daniel once said made me look like June remembered, not January postponed. I saw the aisle. I saw my boy at the altar, shoulders squared in that way he has when he wants to appear taller than the fear standing next to him. But then I saw Jessica's face, the smirk like a signature. I heard again, extra baggage, and the image trembled and would not settle. In the small hours, I brewed a cup of tea. The kettle sings when it believes in you. Steam fogged the window and turned the street lamp's cone into a modest halo. New York in the distance, a low-hummed confession. I thought of how this city is full of mothers and sons living on second chances and hard bargains. The city knows something about reinvention. It also knows about vanishing acts. I wondered which one I had been assigned. By morning, my phone lit up with messages that were part affection, part attendance sheet. On our way. See you soon. Where are you? Daniel's voice, somewhere between boy and man, left a voicemail that would make me cry again later when I let it. Mom, please call me. Jessica said you weren't feeling well last night, but I know that's not it, please. He had always been good at tests. This one he could not study for. When my sister, in a dress the color of expensive champagne, arrived unannounced, she did not bother with pleasantries. Get ready, she said, as if readiness were a sweater I'd forgotten to put on. I told her what Jessica had said. The anger drained from her the way color drains from a sky before a storm begins in earnest. She sat. Some truths do that to chairs. People will blame you, she whispered at last. She was not wrong. Blame is a cheap currency. It passes from hand to hand and buys the same brief satisfaction everywhere. Let them, I said, though my voice betrayed me by shaking. I won't sit in a pew that was never meant for me. At 11, the bells I could not see began to ring. Sound is a stubborn traveler. It found me and entered the house like a relative who knows where the key is hidden. I thought about keys then, how they are trust turned into metal. How many I had given through the years. House keys, car keys, the key to knowing me. I wondered if I had been foolish. Love and foolishness are cousins. They share a laugh and sometimes a last name. I slid the scrapbook back into its box and into the dark under the bed. Not as a burial, as a postponement. Then I did the bravest or most cowardly thing I could do. I waited. When noon came, it brought the call that split the day neatly in two. My sister's voice hushed and wild at the same time. It's not happening. The words fell onto my tablecloth, plain as salt. What do you mean, not happening? I asked, because disbelief is our first line of defense against what we can't reorganize into sense. Daniel found out about Jessica, about everything. There are times when your heart tries to stand before your body does. I gripped the edge of the table to keep the earth where I'd left it. I did not feel victorious. I felt the ache of a truth arriving at last, untidy and unkind, but honest enough to be trusted. If there is a mercy in this world, it is that truth need not be pretty to redeem you. Later, people would say it was fate or providence or simple luck. I don't know. I only know that somewhere in a church where a boy I raised was supposed to say words that turned two into one, the words did not happen. A different script unfolded. And for the first time since Jessica had bowed me out of the picture, I felt something return, something like breath after long water. This is how a story begins, not with a perfect entrance, but with a refusal. Not with violins, but with a mother standing still while the music in another room goes quiet. Tomorrow would ask its own questions. Today had already answered one. I had not been erased, not yet, and the page beneath the scrapbook still waited for the next line. Before the wedding was ever a possibility, before dresses and cakes and whispered cruelty in the hallways of rehearsal dinners, there were years that belonged only to Daniel and me. To tell the truth of that night before his wedding, I must first tell the truth of our beginning, the quiet sacrifices and the everyday battles that formed us long before Jessica ever appeared. When Daniel was 7, he asked me why his father no longer came home. He held a plastic dinosaur in one hand and a peanut butter sandwich in the other, and his eyes were far too old for his small face. I didn't have an answer, not one a child could keep in his pocket without it cutting him every time he reached inside. So I told him what mothers tell sons when the world has already stolen something they deserved. Your father loves you. He just doesn't know how to show it. A lie? Maybe. But sometimes lies are simply truths waiting for their chance to grow up. The fact was simple. His father had walked away, leaving nothing behind but a stack of unpaid bills and the kind of silence that echoes louder than shouting. I was left with rent due in a week, a son with questions, and a body that refused to collapse even when it wanted to. My hands knew the rhythm of work, cafeteria trays, hospital kitchens, second shifts that bled into third. I carried exhaustion like jewelry, worn daily, impossible to take off. Yet in Daniel's presence, I did what so many mothers do. I put on a smile so he would not learn despair by imitation. Statistics tell us that nearly 1 in 4 children in America are raised in single-parent homes. Numbers, though, have no faces. They don't tell you about the mornings you walk into a parent-teacher conference, still wearing yesterday's uniform because there wasn't time to change. They don't show you how you learn to stretch spaghetti into 3 meals, or how you hide overdue bills in drawers so your son won't think past due is part of his vocabulary lesson. I lived those statistics. I wore them like a second skin. Daniel was my reason, my tether, my proof that all of this mattered. Every gold star on his homework, every crooked Mother's Day card he handed me like it was treasure. These were my raises, my bonuses, my vacations I never took. And as he grew, he gave back in ways he didn't even know. When he studied late into the night, promising he would become a lawyer so he could protect people who can't protect themselves, like you protect me, I found in those words enough strength to face another double shift. His dream became my oxygen. I remember one winter night, the heat in our apartment had given out. I wrapped him in blankets, sat him close to me, and we turned the oven on low just to keep the room from freezing. I pretended it was an adventure, like camping indoors. We roasted marshmallows over the stovetop and told each other stories. He laughed, the kind of laugh that fogged up the window with hope. That night could have been misery. Instead, it became memory, the kind we would someday look back on as proof that love could turn even scarcity into ritual. By the time Daniel reached high school, I had mastered the art of invisibility. Parents' nights, sports games, school concerts, I was always there, sitting in the back row, clapping a little too hard, my cafeteria uniform hidden under a jacket. No one saw the fatigue behind my eyes. That was intentional, because my son's life had to be brighter than mine, or else what was the point of all the sacrifice? When college acceptance letters arrived, Daniel's was more than a piece of paper. It was a declaration. The boy who once asked where his father had gone was now stepping into a future none of us could have predicted. He would be a lawyer. He would carry the name Miller into rooms I could never afford to enter. That day, I cried into a towel in the laundry room so no one would hear. I was proud, yes, but pride has edges, and it cuts when you think about all the years that brought you to that moment. Which is why his wedding meant more to me than lace and vows. It was not only his beginning. It was my validation, my moment to stand among the guests and know I had not failed. Every skipped vacation, every promotion declined so I could make it to a soccer game, every blister and every bone-deep weariness, It all pointed to this one thing: my son, a man who loved, a man who chose, a man who could build a family stronger than the one that had abandoned us. That is why Jessica's words sliced so deep. When she told me I was no longer part of the family, she was not just excluding me from a wedding. She was erasing the history that made that wedding possible. It was as if she wanted to rewrite the story, to make it appear that Daniel's life began with her instead of with the woman who had carried him through every storm. Looking back, I see now that maybe this is what so many parents fear, not being unloved, but being forgotten. We do not raise children for gratitude. We raise them because love insists on it. Still, when the world suggests your role is over, that you are now a footnote in your own child's book, it wounds you in ways no one else can see. That night, sitting alone at the kitchen table, I thought about all of it. The nights without heat, the laughter over stovetop marshmallows, the scholarships won through endless study, the promises he made about justice. I thought about how tomorrow he would stand in front of the world as a man. And I wondered, not for the first time, if motherhood was meant to be the greatest vanishing act of all. Because sometimes, being a mother means you give and give until you are nothing more than the outline around someone else's story. And when they step into their next chapter, you fade into the margins, invisible but essential, like the stitching that holds a quilt together, even if no one points it out. In that fragile moment, I whispered into the quiet house, not as a vow, not as a curse, but as a truth I could no longer ignore. If they no longer see me tomorrow, then tomorrow I will not be there. The scrapbook lay open before me. Daniel at 6, missing 2 front teeth, holding up a gold star he had earned. Daniel at 12, taller than me already, smiling as if the world was an easy place to live. Daniel at 17, standing in front of the courthouse on a field trip, eyes burning with the certainty that he belonged there someday. Each photo was a love letter, proof that I had lived my life not for me but for him. And still, by morning, I knew. I would not sit in the pew. I would not watch vows spoken over the bones of my erasure. I would not be an extra in a story I had written with my own blood. The world might call it selfish. But for once, after 27 years, I chose not to disappear. On my kitchen table sat the scrapbook, the silent witness of my life with Daniel. To an outsider, it might have looked like nothing more than a homemade album, a relic from an era before smartphones cataloged every breath of a child's existence. But to me, it was scripture. Every page a psalm of survival, every photograph a prayer I whispered into the years when hope was scarce but love was abundant. I had spent weeks putting it together. After shifts that stretched past midnight, I would sit at that same table, scissors in one hand, glue in the other, arranging fragments of our shared history. Not just the milestone moments people frame for display, but the little victories too. The first time he buttoned his own shirt, a picture of him asleep at the library table after pulling an all-nighter. The ticket stub from the law school acceptance ceremony where I cried so quietly I was afraid people might mistake it for laughter. It wasn't just a gift, it was testimony. I wanted Jessica to see it, to understand that Daniel wasn't just a man she was marrying. He was a story I had written in long, sleepless chapters. When I held it out to her at the rehearsal dinner, my heart beat with both pride and trembling. "I made this for Daniel," I told her. "Maybe you too could look through it tonight." My voice carried that fragile mix of excitement and humility mothers know well, the way you offer a piece of yourself while bracing for it to be dismissed. She didn't even glance down. Her eyes, glossy with the sheen of ambition, stayed fixed on mine. In that instant, the scrapbook might as well have been a grocery list. She leaned in, her perfume heavy, her words heavier still. "After tomorrow, you're not part of this family anymore." It was not just rejection, it was erasure. The way she ignored the book in my hands was the way she wished to ignore the decades behind it. In her vision, Daniel's story began with her. The years of patched shoes, of cold apartments warmed by love and little else, of nights I stitched uniforms while Daniel slept, all of it unnecessary clutter. She wanted a clean slate, a life free of the mother who had held him up when no one else would. I drove home with the scrapbook on the passenger seat beside me, its presence both comfort and accusation. Each stoplight illuminated the cover like an unasked question. Do you matter anymore? That night, sitting alone with the scrapbook spread across my lap, I let the pages speak. The picture of Daniel as a toddler, chasing pigeons in Central Park, cheeks flushed with the kind of joy only children can invent. A letter he wrote me in crayon. "Mommy, you are my hero." A photo of him at 15, awkward in his new glasses but proud with the certificate from his debate team. They were proof that I had mattered, that I had been the architect of a life worth living. And yet, the bitter truth pressed in. Tomorrow I was supposed to vanish quietly into the background, as though none of it had ever been real. I pressed my fingers against the images, as if touching them could make time listen. My hands shook so badly the corners nearly tore. It felt like holding onto the last fragments of myself, the evidence that I was not, as Jessica had named me, extra baggage. The scrapbook was more than memory, it was identity. Without it, who was I? I thought then of American families I'd read about in quiet newspaper features. Mothers working 2 jobs, fathers absent, children raised in apartments with thin walls and thinner wallets. We don't put those stories on wedding invitations. We don't mention them in toasts. But they exist, unspoken, as the scaffolding behind every bright ceremony. The truth is, love often grows in the shadows long before it takes center stage. I whispered into the silence, half a prayer, half a vow. If I am not part of tomorrow, then tomorrow I will not be there. My own words startled me. They carried a finality I hadn't intended, yet one that felt inevitable. For the first time in 27 years, I considered absence as a form of protest. All my life, I had filled every gap, made myself present where others had abandoned. I was the parent who showed up, the parent who endured, the parent who refused to leave. But now, perhaps, my absence could say more than my presence ever could. I closed the scrapbook gently, sliding it into its box. I tucked it beneath my bed, like a secret too tender to expose to daylight. My tears blurred the memory of where exactly I placed it. I only knew that I could not bear to see it tomorrow, when church bells would ring for a wedding I would not attend. In that act, hiding the scrapbook, I sealed more than paper. I sealed the truth of a lifetime. Daniel might never see the book. He might never know how many nights his mother spent stitching together his story. And yet, some small voice inside me whispered that one day, whether through these pages or through memory itself, he would understand. For now, all I could do was wait for morning, with the scrapbook beneath my bed like a buried heart, beating still, unseen but unforgotten. The house was quiet that night, but quiet has many languages. There is the gentle hush of peace, the kind that tucks you in. And then there is the quiet that feels like judgment, every tick of the clock reminding you that your world has tilted and you cannot put it upright again. That was the silence in my home after Jessica's words. I sat at the edge of my bed, the scrapbook hidden beneath, clutching the bedsheet like a lifeline. My body shook as if it were carrying all the years I had forced myself not to tremble. For decades, I had been strong for Daniel, strong when his father left, strong when bills stacked higher than hope, strong when exhaustion begged me to surrender. And now, a single whisper from a woman who claimed to love him reduced me to rubble. "You're just extra baggage." The words replayed like a cruel refrain. They weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. Sometimes the deepest wounds are inflicted softly, precisely, so that no one else hears them but you. She had spoken them like a secret, and in some ways that made it worse. It wasn't meant for the world. It was meant only to cut me. I thought of the years behind me, of nights I came home from work too tired to eat but still sat with Daniel while he did his homework. Of mornings when I packed his lunch with little notes that said things like, "You've got this," "Champ," even when I wasn't sure I had anything left myself. None of that seemed to matter now. In Jessica's eyes, those sacrifices were expired currency, and I was a relic to be discarded. I should have said something. I replayed the moment over and over, imagining myself standing straighter, my voice firm. "You don't get to erase me. You don't get to decide where I belong." But I hadn't. I had swallowed the words, as mothers often do, choosing silence over confrontation. For Daniel's sake. Always for his sake. Yet that night, lying awake in the blue shadow of the streetlight outside my window, I realized something new. Silence, too, can wound. It doesn't just protect, it corrodes. And beneath the grief that pressed down on me like a lead blanket, something else stirred. Not rage, not yet, but a colder, quieter anger. The kind that doesn't shout, the kind that waits. I thought of all the women I had known through the years, co-workers in the hospital cafeteria, neighbors in our apartment complex, mothers who worked 2 jobs, who endured men who left or men who stayed but did not care, women who carried burdens too heavy for any single back. They too had been told, in ways subtle and sharp, that they were too much or not enough. Society had 100 polite phrases for discarding women like us. Single mother, burden, extra baggage. Maybe that's why Jessica's words landed with such precision. They weren't just hers. They were the echo of a world too quick to dismiss the very women who had held it together. I stared at the ceiling, tracing the cracks in the plaster like constellations. I whispered into the dark, not to Jessica, not even to Daniel, but to myself. I matter. The words felt fragile but necessary, like planting a seed in dry soil, trusting it might one day find rain. I could not sleep. I brewed tea at 2 a.m, the kettle whistling like a companion unwilling to let me be alone. I paced the kitchen. I sat. I stood. My body was restless, my mind replaying Jessica's smirk again and again. Each time I flinched as though struck. When dawn finally brushed its pale hand across the window, I had made my decision. I would not go. Not because I agreed with Jessica, but because I refused to sit in a pew as a silent witness to my own erasure. If my presence was to be treated as shame, then my absence would speak louder. But even as I resolved it, doubt crept in. Was I abandoning my son on the most important day of his life? Was I letting Jessica win by stepping aside? The questions clawed at me, sharp and unrelenting. I walked back to the bedroom and pulled the scrapbook from under the bed. My hands trembled as I opened it to a photo of Daniel at 10, standing proudly with his science fair ribbon. His eyes shone with a pride that mirrored my own. I touched the image as though it could steady me. "I raised you," I whispered. "I raised you into the man she thinks she owns. But you are mine first, always mine first." Tears blurred the photo, but I didn't wipe them away. For once, I let myself feel everything: grief, anger, love, fear, all of it. I had spent so many years swallowing my emotions so Daniel could have room to grow. That night, I allowed myself the opposite. I let it pour out, every drop of it, because perhaps the truest strength isn't in silence, but in honesty. As the city stirred awake beyond my window, I realized I wasn't broken. Wounded, yes. Diminished, perhaps, but not broken. Jessica had mistaken endurance for weakness. What she didn't understand was that survival builds a resilience quieter but stronger than any cruelty. I folded the scrapbook closed, slid it back into its box, and set it gently under the bed once more. My decision was made. I would not attend. Tomorrow, the bells would ring without me. Tomorrow, the vows would be spoken, or so I thought, without me. But tonight, in my solitude, I reclaimed something Jessica had tried to steal. My worth was not hers to define. And so I whispered into the breaking dawn, "If I must be erased, let it be on my own terms." Morning came like a verdict. Not with trumpets or blazing sunlight, but with a soft, gray light that seeped into my kitchen, painting everything in shades of hesitation. I woke before the alarm, though I wasn't sure I had truly slept at all. My body carried the heaviness of a night spent rehearsing arguments I never spoke, of reliving Jessica's words until they felt tattooed onto the inside of my skin. I went about my morning as if on autopilot, my hands remembering habits my heart refused to join. I filled the kettle, listened for its whistle, poured tea into my favorite mug, the one Daniel had given me in middle school that said "World's Best Mom" in faded letters. The irony wasn't lost on me. To Jessica, that mug was a relic of a woman who no longer mattered. On the counter lay the pale blue dress I had bought months earlier. Daniel had once told me that color looked like the sky when summer first begins. "Mom, you should wear it. You look beautiful in it." I had imagined walking into the church wearing it, imagined his smile when he saw me there. But now, the dress lay untouched, draped over the chair like a dream too fragile to survive the night. My phone buzzed with messages that began as cheerful reminders. "We're heading to the venue now. Can't wait to see you." Then they turned into worried inquiries. "Where are you? You're running late, aren't you?" Typical. And finally, Daniel's voice in a voicemail that cracked something deep inside me. "Mom, where are you? Jessica says you weren't feeling well last night, but I know that's not true. Please, just call me back. Please." I pressed the phone against my chest, my heart aching so fiercely I thought it might split. Every instinct in me screamed to call him, to tell him everything, to race to the church and sit in that pew no matter what Jessica thought. But then I remembered her smirk, her whisper, the way she dismissed decades of sacrifice as if they were clutter in her perfect little picture. And I froze. At 10 o'clock, there was a knock on my door. My sister stood there in her bridesmaid dress, her face flushed from the rush of driving across town. "Margaret, what on earth are you doing?" she demanded. "The ceremony starts in an hour. Everyone's looking for you." I shook my head slowly. "I'm not going." Her jaw fell open. "Not going? Are you insane? Your only son is getting married." I met her eyes, my own brimming with tears I refused to let fall. "He's marrying someone who told me to my face that I am not part of his family anymore. She doesn't want me there, so why should I go?" For a moment, anger blazed in her expression, but then it faltered, replaced by something softer, disbelief, maybe even pity. She sank into a chair, staring at me as though she couldn't quite process what I had said. "Jessica said that? Last night," I whispered, looked me in the eye and said it. Silence stretched between us, punctuated only by the tick of the wall clock. Finally, she exhaled, her voice trembling. "Oh my God." I laughed then, a hollow sound that startled even me. "People will blame me, you know. They'll say I abandoned him on his wedding day. But I've been judged my whole life. What's one more?" She pressed her hands to her mouth, her eyes wide with sorrow. "Margaret, if you don't go, people will think you never cared." I closed my eyes. "They can think what they want. I know the truth. Daniel knows the truth." At 10:45, I stood at the window, watching as neighbors in suits and gowns climbed into their cars, heading toward the church. My own car keys sat untouched on the counter. The bells began to ring at 11, their chime reaching into my home like an accusation. I didn't move. I thought of all the parents across the world who had been left out of their children's ceremonies, birthdays, milestones, sometimes by choice, sometimes by cruelty. I realized I was not alone. My story was part of a larger truth, one that society rarely acknowledges, the quiet grief of parents asked to erase themselves from the very lives they built. I sat at the table, staring at the scrapbook hidden beneath my bed, imagining the ceremony unfolding without me. The vows, the rings, the applause, and I pictured myself there smiling politely, pretending I hadn't been told I was disposable. My chest tightened. No, I thought, I will not perform my own disappearance. It should have ended there, me, sitting in the silence of my own choosing, the world moving on without me. That should have been the end of my story. A mother erased, humiliated, left behind. But then, at noon, my phone rang again. My sister's voice shook through the line, urgent, trembling. "Margaret, the wedding, it's not happening." My breath caught. "What do you mean it's not happening?" Her words tumbled out, half-choked, half-disbelieving. "Jessica, oh God, Margaret, you need to sit down." And in that instant, I understood something I had never expected. By staying home, I hadn't ruined the wedding. Jessica had. And the truth about her would soon rock every guest in that church to their core. When my sister's words first reached me, "The wedding isn't happening," I thought she must have been mistaken. Weddings collapse in movies, not in churches filled with flowers and guests dressed in their Sunday best. But the tremor in her voice told me this was no confusion. This was unraveling. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles white against the plastic. "Explain," I whispered. My body felt hollow, as though my bones had turned to air. She paused, exhaled shakily, and then the words spilled. "Daniel found out the truth minutes before the ceremony, about Jessica, about everything." I sank into the couch, my knees refusing to hold me. What truth? And so she told me, piece by piece, like shattered glass scattered across the church aisle. At 10:30 that morning, Daniel had been waiting in a small side room with his groomsmen, the weight of nerves pressing on his shoulders. His best man, Mark, the boy who had once eaten peanut butter sandwiches at our kitchen table, who knew Daniel's history as well as I did, burst in, pale and shaking. He held out his phone, his voice unsteady. "Daniel, you need to see this." On the screen photos, Jessica radiant in the arms of another man. Not some distant past, not a youthful mistake, but recent, 2 weeks ago. The man was her boss, the same mentor she had gushed about endlessly, the one she insisted was just professional. I could picture it as though I'd been in that room. Daniel's face draining of color, his chest tightening, disbelief clawing at him. "What is this?" He must have asked, his voice caught between anger and devastation. Mark, choking on his own words, had told him the truth. A neighbor had seen Jessica, seen the embrace, and thought Daniel deserved to know before he tied his life to a lie. By then, guests were arriving, filling pews, whispering about flowers and dresses. But whispers spread quickly. Jessica's maid of honor, loosened by champagne and nerves, let something slip. Jessica hadn't just been unfaithful, she had been scheming. The prenup, the one she insisted Daniel sign, was no protection for him. It was a funnel, a pipeline of his future income to rescue her bankrupt family. Her father, bloated on failed investments and arrogance, had even bragged to a guest. "Once Jessica marries that law student, our financial troubles will disappear." I could see it so clearly. The church alive with murmurs, the truth moving faster than the music ever could. Guests turning to one another, hands covering mouths, eyes darting between the aisle and the bridal suite, the illusion crumbling thread by thread. Then Daniel, my boy, storming into the bridal room where Jessica stood in her gown, radiant as a queen about to claim her crown. She must have smiled, ready for the adoration she thought she had secured. But instead of awe, she met fury. He held up the phone like a mirror no one could avoid. "What the hell is this?" Her mask slipped. "That's not what it looks like," she stammered, but Daniel, my Daniel, finally saw. "It's exactly what it looks like." And then, what seared me most when my sister relayed it, he said the words that proved he had not forgotten me. "You told my mother she wasn't part of this family. You tried to erase the one person who has always been there for me, and all this time you were lying to my face." I sat frozen on the couch, tears spilling freely now, because those words were not just confrontation, they were recognition. Proof that somewhere inside him, the boy I had raised remembered. He saw me, even when I thought I had vanished. At 11:15, the church erupted. Daniel walked down the aisle, not with a bride, but with a voice steady despite its breaking. "There will be no wedding today," he announced. "Jessica has betrayed my trust. This ceremony is canceled." Gasps filled the sanctuary. Jessica's parents leapt to their feet, protesting, her mother's shrill cry slicing through the whispers. "Don't you dare humiliate our daughter like this." But Daniel stood firm. She humiliated herself. Jessica followed him down the aisle, desperation clawing at her throat. She shouted, pleaded, swore. But the evidence was undeniable, the betrayal too raw. Guests filed out, shaking their heads, their dresses and suits carrying away the scandal like pollen scattered on the wind. And me? I sat in my living room, the phone pressed to my ear, my sister's voice still pouring the story into me. I felt grief for Daniel's heartbreak, sorrow for the pain no young man should bear on what should have been the happiest day of his life. Yet beneath the sorrow bloomed something unexpected. Vindication. Jessica had told me I was no longer part of the family. But now it was she who stood outside, stripped of her illusions, her carefully curated facade crumbling in front of everyone. I whispered into the quiet of my living room, almost to myself. She wanted me gone, but she's the one who's gone now. And though I didn't know it then, this was not the end of the story. Jessica would not vanish quietly. People like her rarely do. She and her family were about to fight back, clawing for the fortune they thought was theirs. And in their desperation, they would paint me not as a mother wronged, but as the villain who destroyed a wedding. The war had only just begun. By the time the afternoon shadows stretched across my living room floor, the story was no longer mine to hold. It had escaped, slipping into the city like smoke, curling into every corner, whispered from neighbor to neighbor, typed furiously into glowing screens. The canceled wedding was everywhere. Friends called, their voices caught between pity and shock. Neighbors knocked, some with wide eyes full of curiosity, others with the thin-lipped judgment of people who prefer scandal over truth. By evening, my phone would not stop buzzing. Headlines sprouted across social media feeds. Law student calls off wedding minutes before ceremony after bride's affair exposed. For a brief moment, I thought perhaps the truth would stand on its own. That the photos of Jessica's betrayal, the whispers of her family's financial desperation, the shocking collapse of the ceremony, would be enough. But people like Jessica and families like hers don't let truth settle without a fight. It began with a single venomous post. A picture of Jessica in her ruined wedding gown, mascara streaking her cheeks, her caption trembling with victimhood. Some people just can't let go. Some mothers don't know when to stop. The comments never stopped scrolling. Monster. Jealous old hag. She ruined her son's life. Each word felt like a stone hurled at the fragile scaffolding of my identity. For years, my sacrifices had been invisible, my endurance silent. And now, suddenly, I was visible, but only as a caricature, a villain in a story twisted to suit her needs. I glanced at the scrapbook still hidden under my bed, and for the first time, my sorrow hardened into something sharper. Fury. Not the cold, quiet anger I'd carried that rehearsal night, but a fire that burned hotter. Because Jessica had been right about one thing. In this world, perception is power. And if she wanted a war of perception, I would no longer fight in whispers. She thought her lies had destroyed me. What she didn't understand was that I held something stronger than her mascara-streaked theatrics. The truth, documented, undeniable. And with Linda's help, I would bring it into the light. This was no longer about a seat in a pew. This was about reclaiming the story that was mine to tell. The week after the wedding felt like living inside a storm where the thunder never stopped. Every time I silenced my phone, another message arrived. Anonymous emails called me a jealous parasite. Strangers on social media sneered. You stole your son's happiness. Even distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years left voicemails heavy with suspicion. Margaret, did you really tell him not to go through with it? It was dizzying. After 27 years of sacrifice, clawing my way through exhaustion and loneliness to give Daniel a life worth living, I had somehow become the villain in someone else's play. And the cruelest part, Jessica played the victim so well. Her ruined gown, her trembling posts, her crocodile tears. People believed her because she gave them a show. One evening, I found Daniel on my couch, a letter crumpled in his hands, his face pale with a worry no mother should ever see. "They're threatening me too," he whispered. "Jessica's father says if I don't clear her name publicly, he'll drag you into court. He says he'll ruin you financially." My heart pounded, but I kept my voice calm. "And what did you say?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "I told him to go to hell." But I could see it, the fear etched beneath his resolve, fresh out of law school, burdened with student loans, his career just beginning. A lawsuit, even a frivolous one, could drown him before he'd had a chance to stand. For years, I had carried him through storms. Now he was trying to shield me, but this storm was different. This wasn't about silence. This wasn't about endurance. This was war. That night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I remembered something Jessica had once said to me with her trademark smirk. "You don't understand, Mrs. Miller. In this world, perception is everything. People believe what they see." She had been right. People believed her mascara-streaked performance because she played the role convincingly. The tragic bride, the cruel mother-in-law, it was theater, and the world loves theater. But what Jessica didn't count on was that I had my own arsenal, not crocodile tears, not staged photographs, but something colder, sharper, impossible to refute. I had proof. The prenup itself was a weapon, laced with clauses so predatory it resembled a corporate acquisition rather than a marriage agreement. Clause 14, subsection 3. In the event of divorce within the first 5 years, 75% of Daniel Miller's income shall be transferred into accounts held jointly by Jessica Hayes and her father, Richard Hayes. Linda, my friend at the law office, connected me with a financial investigator. Within days, we uncovered a string of bankruptcies, debts, lawsuits stretching back nearly a decade. The Hayes family wasn't securing a future, they were looting one. I remember spreading the documents across my kitchen table, the pages covering the wood like a battlefield map, bank records, court filings, the prenup itself, marked in red ink by Linda's hand. And in that moment, clarity replaced despair. Jessica hadn't just betrayed my son emotionally. Her family had plotted to drain his life before it had even begun. For years, I had been told to swallow my words, to endure quietly, to let people think what they wanted. But this wasn't just about reputation anymore. This was about Daniel's future, about the truth, about every mother who had ever been shoved aside and told her sacrifices didn't matter. I poured myself a cup of tea, sat at the head of the table, and whispered into the silence, "You wanted a war of perception, Jessica. Fine. But I will not fight with silence. I will fight with truth." I knew what had to be done. No more hiding under beds. No more shrinking into shadows. If Jessica's family wanted to play this in public, then public they would get. 2 weeks later, I walked into the ballroom of a downtown hotel, wearing the pale blue dress I had bought for Daniel's wedding, the one that had once symbolized hope and now symbolized defiance. Jessica's family had invited Daniel to a resolution dinner, their voices dripping with false sweetness. He had begged me not to go, terrified they'd ambush me, but I knew I had to face them. As I entered, all heads turned. Jessica sat at the table in a sleek black dress, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. Her father leaned back in his chair, the practiced confidence of a man who believed money could rewrite any story. Her mother dabbed at her eyes, playing the role of fragile matriarch. "Well," Richard Hayes said smoothly, "look who decided to join us. Mrs. Miller, we were just discussing how to resolve this unfortunate misunderstanding." Misunderstanding. I repeated, my voice steady as I set a thick folder on the table. You mean the affair or the fraud? Jessica's smile flickered. You're still clinging to lies. I slid the folder across the table. Then explain these financial records, these bankruptcy filings, and this your prenup. Clause 14, subsection 3. 75% of Daniel's income funneled directly into your accounts. Gasps rippled through the room. Even Daniel, who had skimmed the prenup but never studied it in detail, turned pale. You were planning to gut him, I said coldly. You weren't marrying my son, you were marrying his bank account. Jessica's father's face flushed crimson. You have no right. I have every right, I cut him off. Because you dragged my name through the mud. You painted me as jealous, bitter, but now everyone will see the truth. You weren't building a family, you were staging a heist. The table dissolved into chaos. Jessica's mother cried. Her father threatened lawsuits. Jessica sputtered excuses, insisting the photos were fake, the prenup misunderstood. But Daniel stood up, trembling, his voice stronger than I had ever heard it. You lied to me about everything, and you tried to erase the one person who has always been there for me. The room fell silent. Jessica froze, realizing her own words, you're not part of this family, had come back to haunt her. That night, when Daniel and I walked out of that ballroom together, my arm linked through his, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not victory, not even relief, but recognition. My son saw me again, and no amount of lies could erase that. Still, as we drove away, Jessica's final warning echoed in my mind. You wouldn't dare make this public. She was wrong. Because if perception was everything, then I would make sure the world saw the truth. The days after that confrontation at the hotel were a blur of headlines, whispers, and shifting loyalties. For once, the story wasn't being told solely by Jessica's mascara-streaked performance. With Linda's help, I handed over the financial records, the predatory prenup, the trail of bankruptcies, to a journalist who specialized in exposing schemes hidden beneath polite society. When the article went live, behind the canceled wedding, the Hayes family's financial scams uncovered. It was like striking a match in a dark theater. Suddenly, the spotlight turned, and Jessica's tragic bride act wilted beneath its heat. Social media, once her stage, became her courtroom. Comments poured in. So she wanted his paycheck, not his heart. That poor mother-in-law. Can you imagine being told you're not family after raising your son alone? Jessica's a gold digger, plain and simple. The tide shifted. Where once I had been the villain, I was now seen as the survivor, the mother wronged. Yet victory never tastes sweet when it's built on your child's heartbreak. Daniel moved through the days like a man learning to walk again. His smile fragile, his eyes distant. He went to work, buried himself in cases at the law firm, but I could still see it. The wound Jessica had carved, raw and unhealed. One evening, we sat together on the porch, the cicadas humming their endless summer song. Daniel cradled a mug of tea, his shoulders hunched in a way that made him look like the little boy who used to curl into me during thunderstorms. He turned to me, his eyes glistening. Mom, I don't know how you stayed so strong. She nearly broke me. I reached for his hand, squeezing it the way I once did before school exams when he was trembling with nerves. Because I've been through worse, I said softly. And because I always knew one day you would see her for who she really was, it just took time. He swallowed hard, his jaw trembling. You were always my family, always. In that moment, I felt the years collapse into themselves. The single mother scraping pennies for rent, the woman stirring soup in a cafeteria kitchen after midnight. The mother told she was extra baggage, all of it worth it because my son saw me again, not as a burden but as his constant. Yet even as the world began to accept the truth, Jessica and her family didn't vanish. People like them rarely do. They claw, they scratch, they rewrite their own narratives until they believe them. Jessica's father sent Daniel threatening emails filled with legal jargon, insisting he had been wronged, that he was within his rights to pursue damages. Her mother left tearful voicemails about family unity, as though love had ever been their goal. Jessica herself shifted between rage and desperation, one day vowing to ruin us, the next swearing she still loved Daniel. But for the first time, Daniel didn't waver. He ignored the calls, deleted the emails, and focused on building his life again. The boy I had raised was now a man forged by betrayal, tempered by truth. And I was no longer silent. I had found my voice again, sharp and steady. The scrapbook remained under my bed, but in a way I realized I no longer needed it as proof. Daniel himself was proof, living, breathing, resilient. Still, I knew one thing. This battle wasn't entirely over. Jessica had lost her wedding, her reputation, her golden ticket. But a person who builds their life on deceit rarely walks away quietly. And though I no longer feared her, I prepared myself. Because mothers don't stop fighting, not when their child's future is on the line, not when lies still linger in the air. For the first time in years, I felt ready. And as the summer night deepened, my son sitting beside me, I whispered into the darkness, not as a prayer, not as a warning, but as a promise. She told me I wasn't part of this family, but I always was, and always will be. The weeks that followed should have been a time of healing. The storm had passed, or so it seemed. The headlines had quieted, neighbors had shifted their gossip to other scandals, and Daniel threw himself into long hours at the law firm. Yet storms don't always end with thunder. Sometimes they leave a residue, a silence filled with aftershocks. Jessica's family understood this all too well. Where they had once relied on charm and performance, they now turned to strategy, wielding perception like a blade. They launched what I came to call their second wedding. Not one with flowers and rings, but with posts, whispers, and public pity. Jessica took to social media again, not with mascara-streaked tears this time, but with carefully staged photos. A coffee cup in hand, a soft smile, captions that read, "Healing isn't linear. Some wounds cut deepest when they come from family." Her followers rallied, posting hearts, comments of support, questions about the monster mother-in-law who had sabotaged her happiness. Her parents leaned into the narrative as well. At charity galas, they spoke in lowered tones, making sure people overheard. "It's just tragic," her mother would sigh. "What jealousy can do to a family." Her father, ever the businessman, framed it in colder terms. "It was an interference in a private agreement. We'll pursue justice." Their story was simple, effective. Jessica had been a bride betrayed by a controlling mother who couldn't let go of her son. It didn't matter that the evidence proved otherwise. In a world fueled by headlines and half-truths, perception often outruns reality. Daniel and I felt the weight of it. Colleagues eyed him cautiously at work, unsure whether to extend sympathy or suspicion. Old friends of mine, women I'd known since Daniel was in grade school, asked carefully over coffee, "Margaret, are you sure you didn't push him? Weddings are stressful, you know." Their tone was kind, but their eyes betrayed the doubt Jessica had seeded. I could feel myself being erased again, not by Jessica this time, but by the echo of her story. And erasure, I had learned, is its own kind of violence. One evening, as Daniel returned home late from work, he dropped his briefcase onto the couch with a thud. "Mom, this isn't stopping," he said, his voice heavy. He showed me his phone. Messages from Jessica's father, threats cloaked in legal jargon, defamation, interference, financial damages. He says if I don't clear Jessica's name, he'll drag you into court. I placed a hand on Daniel's arm. "And what did you say?" I told him no, but Mom, his voice cracked, his shoulders slumping. "I'm tired. I don't know how much more of this I can take." It was then I realized this was no longer just about me. Jessica's family was not only trying to destroy my reputation, they were trying to break my son piece by piece until exhaustion became surrender. I sat at the table that night with the scrapbook before me, though I didn't open it. Instead, I thought about Jessica's words months earlier, said with that cruel smirk. Perception is everything. She was right, but only halfway. Perception is powerful, yes, but truth, if wielded with courage, has its own way of clawing to the surface. If Jessica wanted a war of perception, then I would no longer fight quietly. No more whispers, no more hiding. I would show the world what her family had hidden in plain sight. The bankruptcies, the schemes, the prenup that turned love into a contract of exploitation. The next morning, I called Linda. "It's time," I told her. She didn't ask what I meant. She simply said, "Bring the documents." And as I gathered the files, the emails, the copies of legal drafts, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not sorrow, not vindication, but resolve. Because if Jessica's family believed perception was everything, then I would let the truth speak where their lies had tried to silence me. The battlefield had shifted. It was no longer a church aisle or a ballroom confrontation. This time, it would be the courtroom of public opinion, and I was ready to step into the light. The day I walked into the downtown courthouse with Linda by my side, the air felt heavier, as if the city itself understood that another story was about to be written. The Hayes family had spent weeks orchestrating their campaign, lawsuit threats, tearful social media posts, whispers at every cocktail hour. But this time, I carried something stronger than their words. I carried proof. Linda had told me the night before, "Margaret, remember, this isn't just about defending yourself. It's about exposing them. If they wanted a war, let's give them the battlefield." I nodded, clutching the folder that had lived on my kitchen table for weeks, thick with documents that told the truth in black and white. Inside the courthouse, Jessica's family looked every bit the picture they wanted the world to see. Her father, Richard, in a tailored suit, wore arrogance like cologne. Her mother dabbed delicately at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, glancing at anyone who might be watching. Jessica herself sat straight-backed, dressed in muted gray this time, her face arranged in soft grief. She looked like an actress who had rehearsed her role so thoroughly she believed it herself. Daniel sat beside me, his shoulders tense, his jaw clenched. For the first time in months, I saw not just my son, but the lawyer he was becoming, a man learning to fight not only for clients but for himself. He leaned toward me and whispered, "We're not alone in this." When the proceedings began, Richard's attorney spoke first. He painted me as manipulative, bitter, the meddling mother who had spun a web of lies to ruin her son's future. He spoke of emotional damages to Jessica, of interference in contractual relations, words heavy with performance but empty of truth. Each phrase was a dagger thrown with precision, meant to slice my reputation open before I had a chance to defend it. And then it was Linda's turn. She stood tall, calm, her voice the kind that doesn't need to shout to command attention. She slid a stack of documents onto the table, her words steady. "What we have here is not a misunderstanding, but a scheme. The Hayes family orchestrated a marriage not for love, but for financial gain." The courtroom hushed as she flipped through the pages, bankruptcy filings, court records of failed investments, and then the prenup itself projected for all to see. Clause 14, subsection 3, 75% of Daniel's income siphoned into Jessica's and Richard's accounts in the event of divorce. A collective gasp rose from the room. Even the judge's expression tightened. "This is not protection," Linda said firmly. "This is exploitation disguised as love, and the attempt to silence Mrs. Miller with defamation suits is nothing more than intimidation, designed to hide the truth." Jessica's face paled, her mask cracking for the first time. Her mother shifted uncomfortably, her tears suddenly drying up. Richard slammed his hand against the table, but his outrage sounded less like authority and more like panic. Daniel stood then, his voice shaking but strong. "They told my mother she wasn't part of my family. They tried to erase her, the one person who's always been there for me. And all the while, they lied to me, to everyone. I won't let them take anything more, not my future, and certainly not my mother's name. For a moment, the room was silent. It was the kind of silence that carries weight, that shifts the air itself. The lies, so carefully spun, lay exposed under the harsh light of truth. As we left the courthouse, cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, the world hungry for sound bites. But I didn't speak. Not yet. My story had already been twisted once. Now I would let the evidence speak louder than I ever could. That night, Daniel and I sat together in the pale glow of the porch light, exhausted but lighter somehow. He turned to me, his voice soft but resolute. "Mom, I finally understand. You weren't trying to protect me from love. You were trying to protect me from being used." I held his hand, my heart swelling with both sorrow and pride. "And you finally see it now. That's all that matters." Jessica's family had wanted to make me the villain. Instead, they had revealed themselves. Yet I knew this battle wasn't just mine or Daniel's anymore. It was bigger. It was every parent dismissed as irrelevant, every sacrifice erased, every truth buried under a prettier lie. And for the first time, I wasn't just fighting for my son. I was fighting for myself. The article broke on a Tuesday morning. I remember the sunlight spilling through my kitchen window, striking the folded newspaper on my table like a spotlight. Behind the canceled wedding, the Hayes family's financial schemes exposed. The headline was ruthless, the kind of ink that stains reputations permanently. The piece laid it all out. Richard Hayes's trail of bankruptcies, the predatory prenup that looked more like a corporate acquisition than a marriage contract, and Jessica's carefully staged deception. It even included screenshots Daniel had provided of late-night texts Jessica had brushed off as work messages, now revealed as threads to her affair. There was no mascara-streaked gown to hide behind this time. Just evidence. Cold, undeniable. The tide turned overnight. Where once strangers had called me a jealous hag and the monster mother-in-law, now the comments spoke differently. She raised her son alone, and this is what they tried to do to him. Unbelievable. That prenup is daylight robbery. Imagine telling the woman who sacrificed everything that she's extra baggage. Jessica is the villain here, not the mom. For the first time in months, I felt the weight lift from my chest. Not entirely, but enough to breathe. Daniel came home late that night, his tie loosened, his eyes tired but softer. He carried takeout in one hand, Chinese food, the kind we used to share after long days when he was a boy. We ate in silence for a while, the clatter of chopsticks the only sound. Finally, he looked up. "Mom," he said quietly, "it's over. People know the truth now. She can't touch us anymore." I studied his face, the man he had become, forged by betrayal but steadied by truth, and I realized something. Jessica's war had failed not because I fought louder, but because I fought smarter. I had chosen truth over theater, and in the end, truth has a way of surviving even the ugliest storms. But still, I couldn't call it victory. There is no victory in watching your child's heart break. There is no triumph in remembering how close he came to being trapped in a marriage designed to bleed him dry. What there is instead is survival. And survival, I've learned, is its own kind of grace. Later that week, Daniel and I sat together on the porch again, the night air cool, the stars faint above the city haze. He reached over, took my hand, and said, "I should have listened to you sooner." I squeezed his fingers gently. "You saw it when you needed to see it, that's enough." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, in a voice almost too soft to catch, he said, "You're my family, always." The words settled into me like a bomb, not because I doubted his love, but because after all the erasures, the whispers, the accusations, I needed to hear it. I needed him to name me not as baggage, not as an obstacle, but as what I had always been. His mother, his anchor, his home. As the night deepened, I thought of the scrapbook still hidden under my bed. One day I would give it to him. Not to prove my worth, he knew that now, but to remind him of the story we had written together. A story of resilience, of sacrifice, of love stronger than betrayal. Jessica had tried to erase me from my own family, but in the end, it was she who disappeared. And what remained was the bond that had carried us through every storm. A mother and her son, standing side by side, unshaken. Because the truth is simple, even if it takes years to surface. You can try to cut a mother out of the picture, but you cannot erase the frame she built. Every story has its storms, and every storm eventually passes. This was not just a tale about betrayal, canceled vows, or legal battles. It was, above all, a story about resilience. The kind that is stitched quietly into the sacrifices of a mother, the loyalty of a son, and the power of truth to surface even when lies rise louder. Jessica and her family tried to erase me, but what they forgot is this: you cannot erase love. You cannot erase years of shared dinners, bedtime stories, scraped knees healed with kisses, or the courage built in a small apartment where hope was the only luxury. Those things outlast even the cruelest words. Daniel and I came through the fire not unscarred, but unbroken. And perhaps that is the deeper lesson here. Family isn't defined by ceremonies, contracts, or appearances. It is defined by love, loyalty, and the willingness to stand together when the world tries to tear you apart. To you who have listened, who have walked with me through this journey, thank you. Your time is the most precious gift you can offer, and I am grateful you chose to spend it here. May you carry from this story not just the drama of what was lost, but the reminder of what endures: truth, love, and the bonds of family. I wish you and your loved ones peace, health, and happiness. Hold your families close, treasure your moments together, and remember, no one can erase the love you've written into the lives of those you cherish.